you never know who you're passing by on the subway, on an airplane. I mean, I have countless stories of people that I connect and engage with. Like you said, our most valuable currency is the relational currency. So if I'm not investing, I'm missing out.
On this episode of A Call to Leadership, we tackle the real challenge of crafting amazing opportunities through, of all things, the leveraging of a curious mind. Can a mindset of curious connection, of cultivation, really become a game changer in our leadership journey? Or is it rather an overrated and romanticized approach to trying to get things done? Well, I've invited an expertly curious mind, Jacob Dawson. Can't wait for you to join us. I'm Dr. Nate Sala, and this is A Call to Leadership. Jake, so good to have you back on the show.
Hey, glad to be back. I know last time we had a few technical difficulties. We're in this beautiful room now on a beautiful day in St. Louis, so happy to be back.
Absolutely, man. So we've had lots of great conversations around leadership, and one of the areas I really wanted to cover today is sharing your philosophy on a very important part of leadership, an essential part of leadership, which is innovation. And a lot of people think innovation has to be some kind of disruptive technology or something grand and huge, and it stifles the process of innovation. And really, if we just boil it down to the word, it's really just ideas. Innovation is an idea. And leadership hinges on that, because as leaders, we have to create new ideas of a new, better future that we want to travel upon so that others can join us in this pursuit, right? Make it attractive, make it worthwhile, make it achievable. And I say that to say, when you look across the swath of visionary leaders or great leaders, innovation is a hallmark. And I'm going to read a quote to you that is from an innovator who most of our listeners know, including yourself, Steve Jobs. Back in the late 90s, when he took Apple back over, it was 97 when he came back. And by 99, he realized, I have to be able to get in front of my customer, and I can't do it with his Apple computers when they're in the back shelves of CompUSA or a place like that. And so he thought, well, I got to make a difference, and I've got to be able to grab people where they are. And so he said this. He was interviewing a potential new hire, Ron Johnson from Target, for this Apple Store idea. And here's what he tells Ron. If Apple is going to succeed, we're going to win on innovation. And you can't win on innovation unless you have a way to communicate to customers.
Yeah, I mean, that's tremendous. I think one of the things that Jobs always did so well is distill down something that's complex. One of my favorite quotes of his is that simplicity is the ultimate form of sophistication, right? And I think that what he's getting at least from my perspective, is being able to really understand the vision where you want to go as the leader, and then the ability to communicate that in a very clear manner. And one thing I've come to find, and I don't know exactly where I read this, I first heard Tony Robbins say it, but I'm sure he found it from somewhere else. But clarity is power. The ability to really create a clear vision and communicate clearly, to the people that you lead, that's going to get you where you need to be. Everybody needs to be on the same page. And one of the things that I'm constantly starting to understand is that if something breaks down, it's usually because of a breakdown in communication, and usually it's because I've created something too complex, right? So when I communicate with somebody, it has to be so simple. My dad, he was an executive for Leo Burnett, one of the biggest marketing companies in the world. He worked on the I'm Loving It campaign for McDonald's. He had a bunch of different companies that he helped spearhead kind of their campaigns. And one of the things that he told me that I'll never forget, he said, Jake, we look at making it so simple that a second or third grader can understand, what we're trying to communicate. If it's more complex than that, it gets lost in translation. I don't know if you've ever played that telephone game, right? If it's a long phrase, what starts at the beginning, when it's passed down through a chain of command, by the end can be a whole different message. And so kind of sticking to the message and creating a clarity around what you want, that, is really powerful to be able to communicate to everybody else that you're trying to lead and get them to the same place.
Yeah, indeed. No, I agree. I think that distillation, and I think that you share that, you're an innovator. I would classify you as a person who is constantly seeking to improve and even game change an area of commerce or business development. And so I'd like to just unpeel that a little bit, because I know some of our listeners, they want to step into more of an innovative mindset, a creative mindset, a discovery, curiosity mindset. Where does that come from for you?
Yeah, so I'm really curious, by nature. I mean, I think that's where it starts for me. I'm curious, why people do what they do. I mean, that's kind of the starting point. I really like people, and I don't think, I've seen T-shirts that say, my dogs welcome everybody else by appointment. I've seen people that don't necessarily, enjoy being around people as much. For me, that's the joy, of my life, getting to know people's stories and really being curious about, why they ended up where they are. Right. And then kind of de-engineering that. And so in a lot of ways, you talked about discovery. And for me, I'm constant, and I didn't until about, 3 or 4 months ago when we went on the retreat to Disneyland, Disney World, excuse me. And, you kind of pointed that out, that Disney spent a lot of time in what you call discovery. I started to realize, I do the same thing. I never put a name to it, but I'm constantly observing people. I'm observing, how they interact collectively, how they interact individually, how they interact with products and services. And one thing I'm constantly finding is that when something really hits, right, when something is successful in one area, how can it map somewhere else, right? And that's really the basis of kind of the innovative spirit, for me, is really discovering what works, right? And then how does that map somewhere else? Where could that be effective somewhere else?
Yeah, that's huge. In fact, you remind me of Southwest Airlines. When they wanted to create more on-time flights, they went to NASCAR and studied pit crews, because the pit crews were able to get cars in and out quickly. And part of the discovery was, well, they're only working on one car. And then the 737 became the only airplane that Southwest Airlines actually had to anywhere, right? There was no 747s, no 757s, there weren't Airbuses. I mean, it was just one plane with one pit crew. And of course, the end result is innovation that creates new ideas with on-time flights, because everybody wants their flight to be as on time as possible. And I think that's what you're talking about.
No, absolutely. So I think, one of I watched the movie The Founder, by the story of Ray Kroc and McDonald's. And a lot of people don't know, but Ray Kroc didn't invent McDonald's, right? I mean, he just created systems that streamlined the process and made it more effective. And a lot of people don't realize, but those assembly lines, if you will, that really started with Henry Ford and the T model. Right. And so in some ways you think about it and you're like, okay, how does creating a car and creating a double cheeseburger, how are there similarities there? Right. And so in a lot of ways, that ability to see something that's successful in one area, right, and seeing, okay, what are the traits there that I can, cultivate in a whole different area and make things effective. Right. And so I think that, and the Bible always talks about how there's no new ideas under the sun, right? They're just reprocessed over and over. But the reality is that the people, I think, that are able to really recognize those patterns, that pattern recognition, that I think is the beginning of that innovative spirit and the beginning of innovation, in general. I think when we were at Disney World, we talked about different components of the park, and Disney had mapped a lot of that out by different places that he'd been, right? And so the ability to take a lot of different ideas, put it together and make a whole new stew, if you will, I mean, that I think is at the foundation of innovation.
100% agreed. Yeah. That is so relevant and important, because unpacking even that is that sometimes when we think of innovation, maybe the stress levels go up a bit because we think, oh, well, I'm not sure that I could be an innovator. I'm not sure that I can bring something totally new to the marketplace or something that is incredibly attractive. But what you're saying is really breaking it down into what you're passionate about and beginning to have those observations, and then taking each of those observations and mapping a brand new pattern out of different types of patterns. And what is beautiful about it is that it does require tremendous amounts of effort. That's a fact,
without question.
But it's a labor of love at that point. And because I really want to go back to and this idea of your observation of people, because I think that's a really important aspect of it. And then later we can share more about some of the things that you're doing in this space. But great leaders are intimately not only acquainted, but concerned about the human condition. They want to improve or even transform the lives of individuals, and they're connected with that. And when you begin to observe people and take interest in them and begin to understand where there may be an opportunity for them to reach a better future, or maybe where they struggle. And I've observed you do that. I've observed you. I mean, you will, I don't know what's going on inside. Maybe you can share, but I see this sort of computer going, firing up when you make a new relationship and you're observing all these different patterns in people. What is happening in your head?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nate. I think for me personally, it really starts, and I'm not going to try to sound all moralistic, but service is really, I think, the foundation. When you communicate with somebody, people are very intuitive, right? More so than I think we give them credit for. They understand like what you're trying to accomplish, in a conversation. And so for me, I learned early on from a good friend of mine who's a tremendous salesman in the software space. He said, Jake, I'm just trying to figure out how can I best serve the person I'm speaking with, right? And if I can't, how can I point them to somebody that actually can serve them? And so for me, when I have a conversation with somebody, I'm getting to know somebody. Again, it starts with curiosity, but it's really, how can I serve this individual? There's this great quote by Zig Ziglar. He said that if you help enough people get what they want, you'll never have to worry about getting what you want. You'll get everything that you ever need, helping enough people get what they want. And so for me, it's really trying to understand how can I serve this person, and then where is their crossover with what I'm doing and with what they're trying to accomplish. Yeah,
and I think you've done that masterfully. In fact, you have a laser sharp focus on that. Is where there's an intersection. And that's a good segue, because another thing about great leaders is when we discover patterns, we're also looking for resources, maybe not for today, but perhaps something in 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Do you think that far out when you're thinking, wow, this is a person who I see that there's some kind of possibility for us to intersect and serve one another, but it may not be today?
Yeah, absolutely, Nate. I think what I've come to find is when it comes to, high quality people, you can never get, too many of those people, right? And so I think sometimes people often make the mistake of, hey, this person can't intersect in my life now. And so, there's not really anything that I need to do to cultivate that, or there's no reason for that. And I find the exact opposite. Right? If there's an opportunity, I mean, that's how we met, right? I think this was going on almost 2 years now, which is crazy how fast things, kind of speed up. Yeah. But essentially, when we met, the context was, it was, I think, July of 2020. So a couple months into one of the biggest changes of our lifetime, with the pandemic. I'm working my business. I was making balloon art at the time, I'm in Branson, Missouri, which is, let's just say, not known for a hub of thinkers that doesn't sound right. It's not a hub of influential thinkers, if you will. I don't know how to put that in a nice way.
I think I understand.
But I met you, we connected, and then there was something in our conversation where I'm like, this is somebody that I need to continue to cultivate a relationship with. And then what I tell you, hey, I'll meet you, was it the following, I think it was a Friday. I said, hey, I'll meet you Tuesday in St. Louis, which is like 4 or 5 hour Greyhound bus drive away, which ended up being for me. And for me, I found that like that ability to kind of make those connections and cultivate those relationships, that's what's really separated, I think, my approach from a lot of my peers. I spend a tremendous amount of time in cultivating and building relationships because my perspective, Nate, and the way I approach things is when I see a problem, the first thing that comes to mind is who, not how. Meaning, if there's a problem, I don't think of how can I solve this problem. I think who is best equipped, from my network of people that I've connected with to help solve this problem. I mean, that's how I approach it. And so in order to continuously solve problems, I need to continuously build networks and continuously serve and add value to people that I meet.
Yeah. So this reminds me of the most valuable currency we have available to us. And it's not the dollars in our bank account. It's not the new value of our cyber or cryptocurrency. It's relational currency, social capital. That is the most valuable currency we have as leaders, as individuals, as entrepreneurs. And this is something that you are talking about right now that you cultivate. You add more and more value in your relational currency wallet. And then you're able to use that when necessary to pay for whatever breakthrough you need, whatever system you need, whatever idea you need. And do you find that people then respond generously?
Absolutely. I think, people are far more generous than we give them credit for. I think it's interesting when you really take time to be interested, not interesting, right? But interested, in people. It's amazing how those people respond. I often find it, really ironic. I'll bump into usually people my own age that are trying to build a business or trying to get something off the ground, and I'll see them in public or I'll see them just out and about, and they'll have their headphones in. They'll be down staring at their phone. They'll be kind of locked in. And the entire time I'm thinking, you never know who you're passing by on the subway, on an airplane. I mean, I have countless stories of people that I connect and engage with. Like you said, our most valuable currency is the relational currency. So if I'm not investing and actively building those relationships, I'm missing out. A lot of times, my friends and family, they always like, Jake, I don't know how you do it. Things just happen for you. Or, I work so hard and I grind and I do all this stuff. And again, I'm not against grinding, right? We all need to do that. But I'm a big believer in, like, I'd rather get to where I'm going as quickly as possible, right? And so the way that I've learned to do that is through relationships, with people. And finding the people that can come alongside you. And so, I would encourage, especially, younger generation, I think older generation, we got a lot to learn from you guys, but the ability to take the headphones off, disconnect from the phone, start conversations, go find places where, different people and different, thought processes. I was at a wine tasting a couple days ago. I don't know the first thing about wine. Frankly, I don't even like wine that much. But I made some connections there. Most of them were people 20, 30 years older than me. And from that, I got 3 connections to 3 potential investors, meetings next week. I got one guy as a business coach, that wants to coach me, for free because he says he sees a lot of himself in me. Those don't happen if I'm locked in my headphones or locked into technology and disconnected from people.
Well, that brings up a tweet from yesterday, and I'm just loading it up because I wanted to get it right, from somebody that most of our listeners, including yourself, would know Elon Musk. Of course, he just bought Twitter just a few days before this episode is being filmed. And he said this: now that they bought Twitter, I'm deleting it. FB is next. Go outside and enjoy your life. Does that speak to, now, of course, whether or not that happens, it may have already happened, it might not, who knows, right? But I guess the point he's making is, to your point, get out of your focus on the internal and focus more on the external, what's happening around you, and actually cultivate maybe some relationships. Enjoy your life outside of that. Do you think that we've, as much, and here's a kind of a side note, as much as we've innovated with technology, can it have turned into a crutch that's kept us now from building relational currency?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things, I'm a big believer that, you keep people accountable for their own decisions. And so I don't like blaming technology platforms for our world's problems. I do think that at times, these platforms accentuate some of the already existing, problems that we have. But I do think that when it comes to kind of socially interacting with people, we need that. I mean, that's part of our DNA, as human beings. And I think that, spending a lot of time on social platforms in place of that time, in person, engaging with people, I think that can only lead to negative effects, long term. Because the problem with some of these social platforms is that, they're built to create echo chambers, right? Of people that think the same way, talk the same way, have the same ideas. And so, the way that they're built, and I'm not completely against that, because I lead a technology startup, and there's components of that are really useful, right? When you go to these different sites and there's certain things that you're interested in, they point you to other things, right? I'm really into personal development, and each time, I search somebody else, I'm introduced to somebody that I would never have known, about. So it's a double-edged sword, right? But I do think that if we can prioritize individuals and stepping outside of just our comfortable space, which I think social media allows us to be comfortable if we want to be, right? I think that there's a lot to be learned, from people that really think differently and see the world in a whole different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're in this space. You're in the tech space. You're in the, if you will, the video and telephone space, right?
Yeah, in the mouth of the beast, right?
Right. You're in the mouth of the beast. Yeah.
All the critics. They're right in the center of that.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you're doing in this space and why it's important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know, if you guys have really recognized, but over the last 5 or 6 years, these video platforms, whether it be Snapchat, right now TikTok, has been just a hugely popular platform that people are gravitating to. And I think, I have a lot of theories as to why, but I think that we're just at the very beginning of this type of communication, the short form video ability to communicate, a product, a service, an idea, communicate about yourself. And so what I've really kind of gone all in on, with some of the products that we're building, and I'll get into that in a second, is this short form video centric platform where people can individually express themselves. I think when it comes to my dad's generation, some of the older generation, it was really much more of a we generation, of us together as a group. And I think that, I call it the iPhone generation, right? It's become much more of an individualistic, and again, it's double-edged sword. I don't think it's all bad, but I think people really want to be individual and be able to express themselves. And I think the best way to do that right now in this soundbite culture that we have is the short form video that, TikTok has popularized. And so what we're doing right now, with some of the platforms that we're building, is we are mapping that short form video and reimagining it in different verticals. And so right now we've got this platform called Vid Rivals, vid like video, rivals like sports rivals. It's a sports social platform that engages sports fans, around sports wagering, with this social video component. So the way that we like to describe it is if you took peer-to-peer wagering and Snapchat and put it together. So simply put, I'm a big Chicago sports fan. For you St. Louis fans here, if we're watching a Cubs and Cardinals game, I can hop onto Vid Rivals. I can take a short video and say, hey, the Cubs are going to crush the Cardinals. Do my little trash talking bit. I'm going to put $20 down. So
sorry, your mic just died. You might want to. No, I'm kidding.
Jeez, come on now. Come on. I'm wearing my Cubs hat and
our
everything.
Our producer probably just killed your mic.
Yeah, right. No. So ability to create short form video, pre-lock a certain amount that you want to wager, and then send that to your friend or somebody that you want to engage with. They'll see that short form video. In order for them to take you up on your wager, they've got to pre-lock their wagered amount, and now you're matched. And during the course of the game, you can send videos back and forth and really just have a great time socially engaging, kind of trash talking, if you will. And then at the end of the game, whoever wins, we facilitate money transfer into that person's account. So it's a really fun way to engage in sports. Right now, sports wagering's become really popular, and the way that we've kind of reimagined it is instead of wagering against the house, if you will, you're being able to wager against your friends, and then also have a lot of fun and engage with them in a social dynamic.
Wow. So as you know, I'm originally from Chicago as well, and so that's one of the connecting points. And I think that you'd even talked about this before, is that you look for ways to connect with people in common interest, right? I mean, shared purpose, shared interest, shared maybe some kind of, and even if it's not necessarily a shared interest in a sport or something like that, it's maybe you share an interest in their love for something like that. And so I moved to St. Louis when I was in and out basically, but permanently when I was late high school. And I had to decide whether I was going to be a Cardinals fan or a Cubs fan over the term. Now, this was the early 90s, and we know the Cubs were not at their finest hour.
They weren't at their finest hour for almost a century.
And I succumbed to the Cardinal Nation, if you will. I still have a lot of Cubs hats friends.
It's all right, Nate. No one's perfect,
right? But you know what's really interesting about what you're saying is through the pandemic, you saw that people were in such a lamaze about their lack of connection, even through the sports world, if you will. So many friends that I would talk to during the pandemic said, I just wish I could go to a game. I just wish I could hang out with my friends and watch something. Of course, there was lockdowns. You couldn't even have gatherings in some places, including St. Louis, of over 10 people. And so there was really people were just really down about it. And you saw that there was such a need and a hunger for community. And so are you finding that, is this part of your idea, your innovative idea with this project?
Yeah, absolutely, Nate. I think one of the things that I found, it's, that old expression, you never know what you got till it's gone, and I think with sports, I started to realize, I used to watch those commercials on ESPN that, the power of sports, that was the premise of these commercials. And I thought often they were kind of over dramatized and, that they were, too mushy. And what I started to realize once we went, almost 3 whole months without any sports at all, is just so many elements of sports that are bigger than just a game, at a time where we're really, often divided on a lot of political issues. Sports is a great connector, right? It's ability to really bring people together. As cliche as it sounds, it's so true. And I think at a time where we were all isolated and then not having that ability to unite, around something, we look for things to unite around.
That's right.
And I think that as people, sports is something that it's an innocuous way of being able to tease your friends, this rivalry, this tribal component, but really around something that can inspire us, something that can bring us entertainment and joy. And so, to be candid, when we first started the company, our platform was really around hiring. That's how I first started the company. And ironically enough, what a great time to start a hiring platform in the middle of a pandemic when we had an all-time high in unemployment. But that's how the platform started, and we're still going to build that product out. But what we found after about a year was that this sports, something I wanted to do in sports was going to come later. But I found in my mind, I didn't give enough credence and credit to what sports can do kind of for the human spirit. And I think that for us, we talk about, trash talking and engaging. It's really, as I don't know about a lot of women, but as men, we tend to love each other by poking fun at each other. Right. That's something that is, kind of really ingrained, at least with my friend group and in my experience. And so the ability to tease and poke fun at, it's a really fun way to engage, and sports is the easiest way to do that.
100%. Yeah. In fact, one of my colleagues in the office, Dave, we would always poke fun at each other and tease each other. And my wife would always know when I was around Dave, because I'd come home and I'd be in a more teasing mood. She's like, "Oh, you must have been around Dave today because you're teasing and trash talking or whatever." I'm like, "Oh shoot, I didn't mean to bring it home." But it's true. That's a way we bond. And so let's just walk it through. So we get on VidRivals, and there's a game, and you put $20 up and I put $20 up against you. And then I can trash talk you about this particular game or through the game, things like that.
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. So, I'm a huge football fan, right? And so this past, I love my Chicago Bears, but just football in general. If you guys watched the Kansas City Chiefs played the Buffalo Bills in a divisional game, this was, I think, in mid-January. And so I'm with my brother, and we're sitting down, and he'd picked the Kansas City Chiefs and I'd picked the Buffalo Bills, and it was a phenomenal game, back and forth, and right to the very end. And so the way that our platform is designed is that if you chose, in my case, I chose the Bills and he chose the Kansas City Chiefs. And it's designed to where you can engage in what we call extending the stadium, right? Instead of just the people right at the stadium engaging with one another with each play, you can be across the country on a couch somewhere and it really get some buy-in with the wagering, right? And if it's not your particular team, the team that's playing to win you money, get some buy-in there. So there's that component. And then there's the ability to really engage, kind of play by play and really enjoy the experience with somebody else, and I think that as it incorporates the social component of a Snapchat or a TikTok. It incorporates a wagering component of a FanDuel, a DraftKings, and then it incorporates the payment processing of a Venmo, a Cash App, and so really putting everything in one place and really just enhancing that experience of watching a game, sports event, and enjoying that with friends.
Wow! So you're in pre-launch beta mode, and this brings me to another famous quote of Steve Jobs again. There's a tremendous amount of craftsmanship between a great idea and a great product. Do you believe that? Is this easy? Is this an easy route?
Oh gosh, that is a loaded question. I used to think that ideas were where it's at, right? Like great ideas, that's what's going to change everything. What I've come to find is I tell everybody all my ideas now when it comes to platforms. Or the reality is, it is so difficult, darn near impossible, to take a great idea and deliver a fully functioning product that meets, that initial idea vision, And so I often say, I came up with this design, and in my mind, I challenge anyone, I'll give anyone the design, right? The ability to execute. What's that old saying? It's 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. I mean, truer words have not been spoken. And I think that the ability to deliver, that's what separates everything. Ideas are pretty cheap, to be candid, right? I mean, ideas into fully functioning products that really bring value, that's very difficult to do. And I think something that I found over time is that, really being able to, like we talked about earlier, have a clear vision of where you want to go, and then find the people, the ability to execute, right? The who, not the how, finding the right people around you, getting the right people on the bus. And then the ability to get all of them working together as one team to execute on a product. Extremely challenging, very rewarding, but extremely challenging.
Yeah. So let's talk about some challenges. People want to hear not always what goes right. They want to know what goes wrong.
Boy, how long is this podcast? Because I could spend an entire day talking about that and some.
Because things do go wrong. We misstep. We have circumstances that are beyond our control. We have limitations. We can only make decisions based on the information we have at the time, and information changes tomorrow, the next day, the next week. Individuals change, right? Their trajectory. I mean, there's so many aspects of this direction that is constantly under our care and supervision, to where ultimately we've got to continue to pivot and make changes even day to day. Do you find that your forward motion is stunted at times? And if so, what do you do to get back up?
Yeah, so there's two main kind of frameworks that I work from in respect to the challenges. I often tell my team, and they'll hear me say, I have certain probably Jake-isms that I use at nauseum. And one of them is learn to respond, not react. They're two very different philosophical approaches, right? Reacting is really emotional in a lot of ways. Something happens, you get a visceral response, and then you take action right away. What I found is being able to, there's this Colin Powell quote. He said, see the problem as it is, but not bigger than it is, right? And so what I've learned is the first thing that I need to do is really identify kind of the problem, see it as it is, and a lot of times getting it on paper instead of in my head. I'm able to kind of really size it up. And then also, the other thing that I've really come to find is that people tend to run away from problems, but problems are where the opportunities are. So I often say, I don't have problems. I got opportunities, right? I mean, it's a mindset kind of shift, and it's really a way of approaching a situation that gets you the best outcome, right? And so oftentimes when there's a big problem, I look at it as, hey, how if I solve this problem, right, it's going to take me in a direction that I wouldn't have otherwise gone had I not had the problem, right? And so that's how I look at it in terms of opportunity, is that the biggest problems solved are going to bring the biggest reward.
Right. I was in a part of my graduate work called oral comprehensive exams. And if you've ever seen the movie with Johnny Dangerfield, Back to School, you may not have seen that, but if you've seen the movie, he's in this sort of exam room and he's got to take this test and he's got all these professors just firing off stuff. It's not like that. But you think it's like that before you take these oral exams. Essentially, it's a comprehensive understanding of everything that you've done in your program. And in that time frame, you have to illustrate your knowledge, your ability to synthesize very complex leadership approaches. And so my philosophy, if you will, as I went into this oral comprehensive exam with my professors was, I made the argument that all business is problem solving. If there were no problems to solve, we'd all be out of business. And I've said this many times over, and our audience may have heard this as well. And one of my professors, after I was finished, and I went through a litany of examples of that, and I won't talk through them today, but when I was finished, one of my professors said, I agree that problem solving is essential, but where does that leave opportunity? Because you didn't talk about opportunity. And I said, my quick response was, well, if we don't have problems, then we don't have opportunities. In fact, opportunities are a problem. In other words, I don't have the opportunity right now. I have to create the opportunity. So this is a problem to solve.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, without question. I think that's people get hung up on that a lot of times, right? Where there's a problem. The lack of resources is a huge one I hear. And I often ask, is it a lack of resources or is it a lack of resourcefulness?
Come on.
Right. And so when I find, and I think Nate's come to find, I'm one of the things I pride myself on is making a lot out of a little. Right. And then really finding creative ways. And that's come full circle in terms of innovation, finding innovative ways to solve problems. Right. And those innovative ways, really create other opportunities. And so again, it's really a mindset. And I think one of the things I've found is it's approach. How do I approach something? And I had a mentor of mine once told me, he said, Jake, it's not the winds, and the seas, it's how you set the sails. That's going to determine, how you're going to, navigate the problems. And one of the things I've found is that, the way that we approach a situation really starts with how we communicate with ourselves, right? Words can rewire the mind, right? So, little things I've often heard like, what do I have to do as opposed to what do I get to do, right? When I look at a situation and what are the opportunities as opposed to what are the challenges? How do I respond versus how do I react? Those are slight word shifts. But again, it's like the set of the sails. It can really determine your outcome. And so, I'm constantly telling myself who I am. And one of the things I've often, I'm very careful what I put after those really powerful words. I am, and then fill in the blank. I'm really careful what I put after that because that really determines in your mind what your identity is. And then communicates that to the world. And so, when I tell myself, hey, I'm a problem solver, I am resourceful. I am, right? It starts with how I approach a problem, my perspective. And the perspective, the prerequisite to that is how do I speak to myself? What are the words that I'm using to set that perspective? And that will take me one of a few different directions. And not only that, as a leader, that's going to set the pace for everybody following you, And so people really tend to follow people with conviction. And it's much easier to have a positive conviction when you've got the right words.
Yeah.
Right? When you've got the right ingredients in the soup. And so I think by and large, what I found is if you can really monitor how you speak to yourself, right? And that'll really set your mindset. And then that'll set you in a position to take on anything that may come. And it creates this courage, right? In the presence of fear and instability. And people follow the ones with courage, the ones with conviction.
Yeah, it's so well said, Jake. Small victories build courage. And those small victories start in the mind. They start in the mind because that sets our vision forward. Our vision begins with what we tell ourselves, exactly like you said. And so this sets the trajectory. You can cite example after example after example. Jimmy V cut down the nets, right? Having the first day of practice, having his team cut down the nets because it created a vision of victory in their minds. And they had a small victory in their own minds. And so the negative self-talk versus the positive self-talk, huge huge game changers, just what we tell ourselves. And I think the lies we tell ourselves that we can't, it's not possible, I won't be able to do this, right? I'm already defeated at that point. And I've said that to my own peer group. Anytime I've heard the word I can't, it's like, okay, you've already defeated yourself, just stop. You have to have the I can mentality. You have to have I'll find a way mentality. You have to have the find the right people to help me succeed mentality, because that mentality creates a different kind of effort. And effort ultimately has an impact on our performance and ultimately on our outcomes and the rewards and ultimately the satisfaction we have.
Well, absolutely. And you'll attract the people that'll have a similar mindset, right? I mean, you're not going to attract the can do, I'll figure it out, I'll problem solve, I'm going to make things happen. You're not going to attract those people with a negative mindset, right? With a mindset, a defeatist mindset. We've had this conversation, countless times of this kind of mastery, self-mastery, self-efficacy, the ability to continuously believe that regardless of what may come, you're going to find a way. And then you build that and reinforce that each time you have those small victories, like we talked about. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, when I look at things, I often, at one point I was concerned and I've learned to just kind of accept, people's perceptions are going to be what their perceptions are. But I often think that, my confidence is mistaken for arrogance or cockiness. And the reality is, when it comes to, my life, I have a really clear vision of where I want to get to. And part of that clear vision, I need to constantly reinforce it, not for everybody else, but for me. I already know what my private jet's going to look like, right? I already know, the school that I'm going to build in Africa that my mom, before she passed, dreamed of. I see it with a clarity and a real conviction. And so oftentimes, somebody once told me, and I think this was a book I read, said that if you want to kill your dreams, just tell your big dreams to small-minded people, and I think I found that not everybody needs to know, where you're going to go, but you need to know where you're going to go.
Yeah. You need to know where you're going to go. And the person listening right now, so encourage you to map out where you need to go, and not just where I think I should be, but where it is irresistible for you to go. In fact, with my students, and Jake, you know this, ask the question, what is my irresistible offer? And it's not just external for my stakeholders or my family or my community. It's for me. What makes my day irresistible to get up and own it and take charge of that day and master my context rather than surrender to it? You've got to map it out, not just in your head. Write it down, communicate it, share it with others, and then begin to live it.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'd like to do really is just spend a moment. I know we've talked a lot about kind of these bigger vision, esoteric, larger aspects. To get real practical for a second, there's this great, I think it was a Chinese parable, and there was a horse and his boy, and in the parable, obviously the horse speaks, and there's this really dark, winding kind of tunnel, and it's right in the middle of this forest, and the boy looks up and says, I can't see the other side. I can't, I don't know what's out there. I'm scared. And the horse says, can you see a couple feet in front of you? And the boy says, yes. Said, great. Take the next step. And so one of the things that I found is, the ability to translate this big vision into actual practical steps. It's really kind of understanding where you're headed, right? Just like on a map, you got to know where your destination is. But the very next step, and probably the most important step, is where am I doing next? What's the very next step? And so for those of you out there that are thinking of starting a business, or thinking of, running a marathon, or thinking of, creating something, creating content on TikTok, or, having your own brand, having clothing brand, any idea that you have, it's really, really valuable and important to create hey, this is where I'm going to end up. But the most important step is the next one, right? What am I going to do next? Do I need to buy that domain, right? Do I need to, file an LLC? Do I need to find a running plan?
Have a conversation with somebody that I respect and admire, a mentor.
Absolutely. What's the very next step? And I think that one of the things that I've found is there's a lot that goes into this big audacious goal that you have, right? There's a lot of components to that. But really, if you can just zero in on the next step and continuously stay focused on the next step, everything else will take care of itself. I think that one of the best pieces of advice I was given early on when I was 19 is, when you first start, don't be as concerned about the how as you are about the what and the why. Mm. What are you trying to do it, and why are you trying to do it? And what I found is that each step of the way you take that next step, the opportunities are going to be presented, often in the form of problems, right? Disguised as problems. But the opportunity is going to be presented for the very next step. And so you don't have to have all the steps figured out along the way. You're not going to. There's no way, right? Steve Jobs had a great quote. He said that, when it's really hard to connect the dots looking forward, but you can always connect the dots looking back. And I think that this ability to kind of live in the moment, hey, I'm going to attack and focus all my energy with the next step, that's going to reduce a lot of the anxiety. Because if you're staying in action and you're moving towards, I always tell my friends, and they get annoyed at me sometimes, they'll have an idea for a restaurant or something they want to create. And I'll say, hey, what are you doing Tuesday? And what do you mean? Well, let's put a business plan together. Let's take the next step. You think it's exciting talking about, where you want to go? Let me tell you how much more exciting it is taking the next step there. And then knowing that, hey, I'm on the road to actually climb the mountain, get to the top. And so I just think that we're very limited on time, the time that we get. The ability to really maximize those moments, that's, in my view, really the secret to really having a life that you can jump out of bed for, every morning.
Well, Jake, you've maximized these moments, and I know that someone is blessed, including myself, that you took the next step and sat in this room today to talk about this very important aspect of leadership called innovation. This is not our last conversation we're going to have. I'm so excited that you're here, and I want to have you come back and visit with us.
Hey, absolutely. Anytime, Nate. I've always have a special place in my heart. I think that one of the things that I found with Nate that's so different than a lot of people that I encounter is just how focused he is, on getting people to the next step, getting them from where they are to they're completing their vision. I mean, that was what your doctorate was on, right? That just the really actualization of that vision. And I think that his passion for that, coupled with his care of people and his servant mentality, it's really inspiring to me and gets me out of beautiful Scottsdale, Arizona to, well, thankfully it's a nice day today, but often a very cold and chilly St. Louis with pizza that has no crust.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah, St. Louis pizza does not have a crust.
This is my last argument on this state. All right, I come from a pedigree of pizza in Chicago. Right, so the first time I had pizza here, the sauce, it comes all the way to the edge. I don't know how this has to do with any innovation. They've lacked innovation in the pizza sector here in St. Louis. But in all seriousness, I really cherish just kind of our friendship and kind of mentorship that you've provided. And I'm always open to anything that I can continue to pass on that I've received from you and from everybody else. I'm deeply indebted.
Well, and I'm here to walk with you every step of the way. Thanks, Jake.
I appreciate it, Nate.